Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday night Community Connections. It's so good to have you here in the room. And if you're watching the replay, thank you for doing that. I just have a few little announcements before we turn the time over to our guest speaker, Milan. Tonight, hopefully that you have received my email. If you haven't, please let me know at kelly@myselfreliance.com.au, and I will make sure that you get on the newsletter. And we are moving over to a new platform, and we are opening up a new My Self-Reliance area called The Lounge. And so this is for our members, where you'll be able to go in and chat to other members, a place where you'll be able to find the recordings easily, and all the information will be stored bit by bit. We'll get it all on there under the 8 pillars, and it'd be a fun place for members to catch up all over Australia. So that's our first announcement. We do have some exciting hub gatherings coming up. So if you are in the hills, we have Zach Joseph speaking on technology. He's an expert in nanotechnology, and lots of information he has right across the board. So that's in the hills area on the 8th of August. If you are on the Mid-North Coast, Hunter Valley or Central Coast, or if you just want to take a drive up, you can come to Lily Pond's retreat for our hub get-together on the 1st of August. And Mayola is our hub leader running that. Thanks, Mayola. We are going to start off at from 9 till 11 with a little bit of gardening. But the actual barbecue kicks off at 12 to 4, and we've got a local youth group bringing their pinnacle. If you dare, we're going to have a fun time that day. It's a family get-together. So register for that. Then we have in the Blue Mountains, they're getting together to do a butter and ghee, make your own butter and ghee on the 15th of August. In the Blue Mountains. If you're over in Western Australia, on the north and south side of the river, you can join them for their first meetup after our launch party last night, which was awesome. Woo! Shout out to WA friends. So on the 1st of August, they're getting together. Joyce and Chris and Rachel, reach out to them if you want to know more info. We will get that up on the website soon. Okay. And then at the end of August, we are going to be in Brisbane for the Tiny Homes Expo. So lots of good things happening all around Australia. You'll find those details more on the website. Go there and register for those events. Some, if you're a member, some are free. If you're doing the butter workshop, there's a small cost. And if you just want to meet some like-minded people and you haven't joined as a member yet, go along to those activities and you can discover for yourself how good they are. Well, it's lovely to see everyone joining the group tonight. We're going to have an amazing conversation. Well, I want to introduce you to Milan, who has been on our calls before. And Milan has had over 20 years in the communications field, and he is an expert in this area. We are so pleased and excited. If you haven't seen Milan before, he did a really great talk with us when he was on the panel talking about finances and cryptocurrency, and also he's well versed in being in the private and knowing your rights. So Milan, I'll turn the time over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to switch off my video and share if that's okay.
Sure. I'll remove myself.
Right, so the presentation today, you can download a copy of the slides. They're all PNG files, so just I didn't want to do an actual presentation because I wasn't sure what format people were using, so we're just going to go through the slides. So you can download it there. There is a password for it, which I've shared in the chat group. Can you all see that? As far as communication goes, I've been in communication, especially off-grid stuff, in very early days of CB radio back in the 1980s. More of a hobby, it's always been a hobby for me, but I've never sort of taken it seriously. So until I started in communication back in 1995 when I joined Telstra. I was there for 5 years. I did a lot of projects there, including Telstra Internet Backbone, all the Big Pond business networks, Big Pond Satellite, and a few other networks. Then I moved on to a US company, Cisco Systems, where I was an engineer for over 16 years. And as an engineer, I was responsible for large corporations, telcos, so the likes of Telstra, Singtel, Optus, whenever they were testing and rolling out any new networks. I also did some work for Hutchison, which was a 3G project. And I was a network specialist. So I looked after not the radio area network, not the cell towers, but I worked on the background with all the IP stuff. So anything to do with routing protocols, security, switching, you name it. Anyway, Kelly asked me to just do an overview on communication, especially off-grid communication. So now that I'm semi-retired and I live on the Mid-North Coast, I use off-grid communication quite a lot for my own purpose. But I have been approached by a local group that wanted to communicate over CB radio, especially because we've had four disasters here in the last few years. We had two major fires and we had two major floods, one in a 150-year flood. And the cellular network and other means of communication are not always reliable, right? So people, especially farmers or people out in the rural areas, are looking at alternatives. And they have been using it for quite some time, and they're getting better and better at, using newer technology. So what we're going to cover today, I'll just give you a little bit of a disclaimer. So I'm used to dealing with large corporations, telco service providers, not so much small communities, right? I'm used to best practice design, implementation, and test methodology. Some of that, can take weeks or months to implement a new network. And we're talking large scale networks. Think of it as a Telstra Internet, for instance. A new product comes along and it goes through a vigorous process, can be up to a year of design, testing, documentation, and so on. So I look at customer requirements, high, low level designs, test plans, then the actual testing, implementing it in the field, maybe even providing training to some of the other engineers, and then providing support. So that's my corporate background. So with this presentation, it's more of an overview. Let's have a look at the big picture, what's available out there. I'm not including all technologies in this solution, right? So for instance, we're not dealing with microwave. We're not dealing with any sort of corporate or big business or big telco deployments. This is more stuff that's consumer goods that you can buy off the shelf and you can use for your own purpose off grid. It's not a workshop, right? A lot of the stuff that I put together when it's a workshop, these slides have been put together with ChatGPT, right? I've just pumped it through just a Word document, made my own notes, and then I said, can you create slides to go with that? And I tweaked them a little bit, but I'll point out wherever there's mistakes because ChatGPT doesn't do a good job at translating everything. And you'll see that with some of the photos, right? So it's more education purposes and do your own research, right? So this will have some links, but then you'll need to do your own research to find out how to deploy some of the information that is in these slides. If you've got any questions, please raise your hand or just call out. Right, so before the internet, there's been a lot of communication that we're used to, and we're still used to this very day. Now, I'm not going to cover the traditional means of communicating, but just remember when the grid goes down, right? When the internet goes down, and we've had one recently with Telstra, the 4G, 5G network went down for a whole day, pretty much. During those situations, there are other ways to communicate. Okay, and we'll cover some of the technology that's been used to communicate, but also there's some traditional ways you can communicate to signal, for instance, SOS type situation. Right, so communication options, grid versus off-grid. So what we mean by grid, you can have a wired connection, you're connected to the infrastructure, right? So it's a powered grid, that could be your home telephone line, could be your landline, could be a DSL service, could be your NBN, whether that's through copper, HFC, or through fiber. Could be wireless, right? Wireless hotspots, when you go to McDonald's or a coffee shop, 3G, 4G, 5G cellular network, NBN, Wi-Fi, and then also some satellite, right? So that's being connected to an infrastructure that's powered, that's controlled, that's what we probably most of us used to. With off-grid, you've got a few options available, quite a few options actually, and not all of them are listed there. So don't forget that you can have the traditional wired option, private, copper, coaxial, or fiber, point to point. So let's say you're on the farm. If you wanted to connect your shed, could be half a kilometre away, you can still dig a trench and put a cable down, Ethernet cable, for instance. And you can communicate between the two, using your own private copper line that you put in. And that's not always feasible because a lot of people move around. So obviously wireless is more popular, right? So the typical wireless that you have is Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. That's very short distance. We're talking only to a few meters. Wi-Fi direct as well. But then as you start going, you can line of sight. You can have the radio spectrum. So UHF CB radio, FRS, PMR. These are all sort of different ways of communicating over radio networks. LoRa, right, which is 915 megahertz, and we'll talk about that in it's low powered, a long range, line of sight, no infrastructure. Okay, just a couple of devices. LoRa mesh is where you have a couple of those devices on the LoRa network, but you have a mesh of devices that actually created an ad hoc network, right? So no infrastructure. These are individuals with devices that create a mesh. And then there's satellite. Now that's really infrastructure, but there are areas where that's considered off-grid as well, where there's, for instance, the 4G network doesn't reach. You can use a satellite to communicate. There's a few comparisons there, some notes. Now, I've created this flowchart and it's been butchered a little bit by ChatGPT, so I'll just point out some of the mistakes in it. But whenever you're assessing off-grid requirements, you've got to have a look at your specific needs and then have a look at your neighbours' needs and your community needs as well, right? So let's start at the top left there. So do you need to send or receive a message or make a voice call? Could be video as well, right? So if you have 4G, 5G cellular signal, or you've got Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi could be through satellite, that Wi-Fi could be through a hotspot, could be through your own home network. So if you don't have service, if you're not on any infrastructure, and you need to reach someone beyond line of sight is typically just a few kilometers, then you would use a satellite. Long range, right? So short range, line of sight, you can use CB radios, you can use the LoRa mesh, right? Basically radio networks, are the way to go. Now, if you do have coverage, there's so many different options available to you. So your 4G, 5G cellular coverage, all sorts of Wi-Fi networks and high-speed internet as well, like Starlink, for instance. So that's going over the infrastructure. Once you go over the infrastructure, you can then use push-to-talk services, dedicated little push-to-talk over cellular network radios, and we'll see some of those examples. You can use things like Telegram, Facebook Messenger. You can use the traditional, make a phone call or a SMS, send an SMS message, right? So that's if you're on the actual grid. So some of the things to consider are how far do you need to communicate? Right? There are limitations with every technology. Do you need voice, text, or both? How many people need to be connected? How portable is your equipment? What is your budget? And how long will you be off the grid? Right, so battery power, etc. Do you need global coverage as well? Right. A couple of things I want to point out is a lot of people are in remote areas. If your 4G, 5G coverage is spotty, right, you need to look at other options, obviously, right? And we'll go through some of those as well. So have a look at the coverage maps, right? The coverage maps, they're quite important. Okay. So I don't know if you're aware, but we've had AM and FM emergency radio broadcast whenever there's a disaster that are transmitted. Now, again, double check those frequencies that are listed in there, but I know the one for Mid-North Coast where I am is correct, and that is the ABC Mid-North Coast. So ABC radio will, during disasters, broadcast, and a normal AM FM radio that you have in your car will pick that up. No problem. Now, that was the traditional way of sending broadcasts, to a lot of people, and it still is very effective, and most people have a radio so they can tune in. So that's broadcasting out to the public. Right, shortwave radios, very popular in Europe, Japan, US, and all around the world, not used so much in Australia to listen to Australian broadcasts. We have a very few shortwave broadcasts here in Australia. Most of those radios will pick up shortwave, like BBC radio, for instance, from all around the world, but they're not widely used to pick up local reception. I could be wrong, but I haven't found many stations. Right, so you can purchase these. There's a few examples there. They are still very good for picking up AM, FM radio as well. They have much better tuners than even some of the car radios. It depends on your antenna too. They're very portable, right? So it's something you can have in your bug out bag. Very useful. Right. There's been a lot of questions and some sort of confusion about AusAlert. So AusAlert, there's been some testing that's already been concluded in some in some areas in each state, but there is a nationwide test that's scheduled for Monday, 27th of July. For the eastern states, it's at 2 p.m. Now, the way that these previously we used to get alerts, and on my phone, I don't know if it's the same in every state, but on my phone in particular, those messages were sent by SMS from that phone number that you see there. And so during the flood in 2025 in Port Macquarie, we received messages. I had 4 messages from the SES, for instance, when it was time for people to, be wary or evacuate. So that was sent as individual text messages to your mobile phone, to every mobile phone that was in the cell area, in a particular area at the time. So if you're outside of the flood area, you weren't affected, you weren't receiving those messages. There was quite a lot of messages received from the police department too, where they were missing people. So those messages were sent to every phone in a particular cell group. With the new AusAlert, it's actually using a new feature. It's called cell broadcast. I think it's actually been around from the 3G network, and it's been used quite extensively in other countries around the world. Japan, South Korea, US, and even a lot of the European states. Right, so we're still a fair way behind when it comes to alerting the public, through cell broadcast. So broadcast to work properly, you need a phone that's, I think, 2019 onwards, with specific Android or iOS version. What it will do when there's a cell broadcast that's transmitted, every phone that's in that cell that's either registered with the cell, every mobile phone that's registered. In other words, you have service and you can make telephone calls and you've got data, or not registered, but what's called camped out, where the cell tower can see your phone. So you might not even have a SIM card in the phone. If it's a newer phone, 2019 onwards, when that cell broadcast is sent out, you will actually receive an alert. These alerts On the right-hand side, you can see the Android-enabled wireless emergency alerts. Some alerts you can switch off through your operating system, through Android or through iOS. The critical alerts that are being sent out, you cannot switch off, right? That's something that's sent to the phone, and unless you have it in flight mode or you have your phone switched off, you will receive a 10-second alarm, audio alarm, followed by a message, right? So again, the messages that they defined, AusAlert website has defined, are 4 particular messages: bushfires, floods or tsunamis, cyclones, severe storms, and national security. National security includes the wording of terrorism and also pandemics, right?
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
If the phones are switched off or in flight mode, there was an assumption for this alert that if you switch your phone back to normal, so off flight mode, or turn it back on, that you would get a delayed alert. Is that a thing?
I'm not sure if you get a delayed alert, because in the SMS alerts, that message, when you switch off a phone, you will get all your SMS messages when you switch your phone back on. With the cell broadcast, it will broadcast that packet, but if your phone is not registered or camped out, or within the reach of a tower, so it's switched off, or you've got it in flight mode, it will not receive that alert. But I don't think you'll receive it afterwards. So you typically, if you want to be safe, you don't want to be disturbed by the alert. And there's nothing sinister about it. I've seen some information where people are worried about the frequency used for the tones and so on. If you switch your phone on an hour later, you should not get that message. You might get that message, but you might not get that critical alarm, the 10-second audio alarm.
Great, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's what, according to the documentation, that's what I read. Yeah, if you're worried about it, and some people have a safe phone, a second phone that they use in an emergency, that they, for instance, if they're in a domestic violence situation, they don't want their partner to know that they have another phone, switch it off and leave it off for 24 hours. That's the recommendation. And your main phone, it's up to you whether you want to put it on flight mode or you just want to leave it on. If you're driving, it might be, disturb you if you're driving. You're not supposed to touch your phone while you're driving, by the way. Anyway, so yeah, you'll get these messages coming through, and obviously in the future, they will be used more to coordinate major alerts. Right. So that's messages being broadcast out to the public. You can also purchase different types of emergency beacons or use satellite SOS type messaging. So you might have heard of EPIRBs, typically used on a boat, personal locator beacon. These are little, tracking devices that you can use in case of an emergency. You pull a tab and then it'll send out a beacon through a satellite, right? So you can be located. The aeroplanes use one as well, called the ELT. And now what's becoming very popular is satellite SOS devices. And we'll go more into those in a minute. So this is one way, if you're off the grid in a very remote area, doesn't matter where you are in Australia, you will have coverage, unless you're under, really thick canopy, or in, somewhere where you can't see the sky. You will have satellite coverage, right? So these are very popular on boats, like I said, or if you're bushwalking, four-wheel driving, and so on. Emergency, you activate the beacon, it gets a GPS fix on you, it sends out a 406 megahertz distress signal via satellite, it gets picked up in the Rescue Coordination Center, and then depending on the type of beacon that you have, it will actually just confirm that it's been received, or in some cases, such as the Garmin inReach product, they'll send you messages, or even some telephones, like an iPhone. It'll send messages back and forth, so they can get your location and a few other details from you. Right, so that's one way you can communicate off grid, and that's one way you can actually sort of, during an emergency, but also with satellite messaging, you can go back and forth, two-way communication. So consumer satellite SOS systems, I don't know if many people know, but the smartphones, the latest smartphones now, so your Apple iPhone 14 and 15 can use satellite to send emergency SOS messages. And same with Google Pixel phone 8, 9, you can send messages. It is quite primitive. The iPhone is a little bit better than the Pixel. It'll get a fix. You have to point your phone to the satellite and keep it sort of within, certain view of the satellite all the time, and you can send messages then. So it opens the SOS feature. So this is where you got no 4G, 5G cellular coverage at all, right, on these phones. The phone connects to the satellite, and then you can send a SOS location or a test message, and it gets picked up by emergency services. So it is a little bit primitive still. There might be a cost involved. There might be a subscription as well on the right-hand side with those services. One that's very robust and it's been used for quite some time is satellite messenger. Right, so satellite messenger, such as the Garmin inReach, you can have the Mini 2, Mini 3 products. There's a little dongle messenger thing with a tiny screen on it as well. There's other products as well, like Zello and so on. Right, so these are two-way messengers. So you can send messages to your loved ones when you're out middle of nowhere. Short text messages, some of them go up to 1,600 characters, like with the Mini 3 Pro, I think it is. You can send even photos, low resolution because the screen is quite low resolution, but you send it connects from your phone as well. So you Bluetooth that device to your phone, and then you can use your phone to send the messages. And the Garmin inReach can be used as like a modem, like a satellite modem then. So that's very useful if you want to, and you don't need to just talk one-on-one. You can talk to your friends, have a telephone book in there, and you can send messages. There is a cost involved. There's different tiers, but very useful if you're literally in the middle of nowhere. Everything goes back to the 24-hour reporting center though. So it's not messenger to messenger. It goes back up through the satellite into the cloud, into the Garmin headquarters there, and then it gets pushed out to the person that you want to send it to. You can also send it to an email address as well, which is quite useful. Satellite Bluetooth, there's different accessories you can have as well. And then obviously satellite phones. A bit more expensive, but satellite phone, you can send a voice call, SMS, and you can also have data as well. Right, so these are standalone. So for these devices, you don't need to have any other equipment. The standalone devices, they communicate with the satellite directly. Any questions before I move on?
Yes, Milan. Which one of those do you have?
I've actually got an old school one from 2010, which still works to this very day. I'll just sort of get it out here. So it's an emergency personal location beacon, McMurdo, little yellow one. I'll show it to you later. But when I go back on camera, so I actually have a GPS watch as well. And if we move forward, so this is Garmin selection. I've got a raised hand here from Andrew.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yep.
Maybe a cover later on, but with the with off-grid communications that you've got, are there any of those options or options you're going to be talking about that are secure in terms of that they don't give you a location or they can't be read by others or understood by others, apart from who you want it to be understood by?
Sorry, the question was, are you sending your location or?
No. Are there communication options that don't give away your location and that your message is secure in terms of that no one else can read it or understand it apart from who you're sending it directly to?
Yeah, so we're going to cover, that's right, there is an option for that, which is radio only option. over 915 megahertz, and that's called the protocol is the technology is called LoRa, and the protocol is called Meshtastic and Mesh Core, where you've got encrypted one-to-one or one-to-a-group message and doesn't rely on any infrastructure. I've got quite a few slides on that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I actually got to move on a bit faster, I think, because I'm spending too much time on the sort of generic stuff here. So, okay, so which one do I have? So, yeah, I've got a watch Phoenix 7. There's an 8 there now with maps and everything. So when I'm trekking through the bush, I use that for my mapping so I can see where I am. And that just uses a satellite. And then I use an old-fashioned personal locator. You know, if I have an emergency, I pull a pin and it messages through the satellite. Right, so I don't have a Garmin product for that. I've got quite an old one. I have other Garmin products though. So yeah, I highly recommend the inReach, the Mini 3 with the red knob. That's a Mini 2 that's shown in the photo on the left-hand side, but the Mini 3 is an amazing product. And there's more expensive products there, but just something small that you can send messages back and forth is very, very useful when you don't have any other coverage. And I think in the previous slide, where's my mouse gone? Okay, this was iPhone satellite communication, how it works, but I won't go into that. You can read that in your own leisure. Right. So something that a few years ago a lot of people had also was a Starlink kit. I've got quite a big one here, it's the size of a suitcase. Starlink Generation 2 in a backpack. Right, so you would typically have, these days you can have a Starlink Mini, quite a small unit, smaller backpack. You have power as well, portable power, and you can take this, you know, in the middle of nowhere again, where there is no 4G, 5G coverage. There is no NBN Wi-Fi coverage there either, and you can actually set up, think of it like a hotspot. You can set up your own hotspot, and then everyone can have Wi-Fi access in the area that you're in. Right, so this is good for remote properties, or somewhere where you're going out to do a project. There is no infrastructure at all. There is no, you know, houses, communication, no cell towers or anything like that. Right, so you can have high-speed internet access. So a lot of people are creating field packs, right, where you have a field pack and you take that with you on foot, for instance. Some people mount it to their expedition vehicles and they have internet with them in the car, satellite internet, and then everything else connects through that satellite internet. So once you're connected through satellite internet, then you can use everything like you would with your smartphone, laptop, you know, push-to-talk devices, anything that uses IP, right, Internet Protocol. Right, another option. So in Australia, we've got a license exempt radio bands that you can use to talk without any subscription. So the first one is UHF CB radio, 476 megahertz. So there's 80 channels there. So these are the radios that people have in their four-wheel drives. You can have a little handheld radio, 80 channel, and you can communicate. The truckies use them as well. Right? Quite a lot of people use them. You know, freely, they're off the shelf. You can just buy radios that will do 80 channel. So these are quite useful on the farm. These are useful, you know, in case of an emergency, if you're traveling up and down the coast. Line of sight, typically 5, 10, up to 30 kilometers. But if you use repeaters, you can go further than that. The next one is HF CB radio. So it used to be called 27 megahertz AM radio. These are the old school radios that have been around and are still around, and you can still use them. They're 40 channels typically. They have much longer range depending on the conditions. So these are quite useful still. If you have those old radios, you can still use them. There's a few ISM bands there, but I'll skip those. So the one we want to focus on is the 915 megahertz ISM band, and that's used for LoRa, LoRaWAN, Internet of Things devices, telemetry information, and remote monitoring. So a lot of remote farms might be using this to monitor their gates, if the gates are open, if there's water in the trough, where the livestock are, all that sort of stuff. But we'll see later it's actually being used for LoRa mesh networks as well to communicate securely over a mesh network. I'll skip the other ones. That's Wi-Fi. So these are basically, you don't need a license to transmit, but you got to keep within the rules, right? So there's certain wattage, like 5 watts typically or less, that you have to stick to. On some networks, it's even less than that. There is a public safety network as well. I'm pointing out one in New South Wales, but there's one in every state where the emergency services use the network to communicate. The police department in New South Wales uses encrypted channels, so you will not hear them, but you can listen to ambulance, SES, and fire rescue, and so on. So when our 4G network went down during the fires, a lot of people were using free radio scanners, which are online, or you can download an app for your phone, right? As long as you've got Wi-Fi on your phone, you can listen to it. Or you can actually use a dedicated scanner device, and I'll show you what they look like in a minute, to listen to emergency services. So, for instance, I was listening to emergency services to see where all the RFS vehicles were at any one time, right? So we knew how far away they were before they came to the farm that we were protecting at the time. So radio scanners, they've been around for decades now. So radio scanners typically scan frequencies, and you got on the right-hand side here some models from 25 megahertz through 500 megahertz. Some go even beyond that, the more expensive ones. Right, so they'll scan through frequencies. You can see RFS, the frequencies that they use there, state emergency services, fire rescue, and so on. These frequencies are published, so you can actually find what the frequency is for your region, and you can freely listen to these legally, and so that you know what's going on in your area. So they're very useful. Like I said, the ones that are encrypted are police and a few businesses and so on might use more commercial grade ones that are encrypted, so you won't be able to hear those. But you can listen to anything you can pick up on the scanner, you can freely listen to. Right? There is a website where you can actually find all the different frequencies as well. I'm not sure if I've got it listed in here. Right. So, sorry, just with scanners. So what the scanners do, you pre-program them, so up to 1,000 channels in some of them. You pre-program them with all the frequencies, so you can see the specific frequencies that are listed in there. So there'll be a frequency per channel that maybe the SES use. They might use 20 different frequencies. So you program each frequency that you can pick up in your area into your scanner, and then you start scanning. You can scan the entire memory bank, or you can scan, say, I want to listen to only 20 channels for the SES. Or I want to listen to all departments. And it'll scan, and as soon as it picks up a voice, a transmission, it'll pause, and you've got time to stop it there and listen to that frequency. So you know there's activity on that particular frequency, right? And then when that transmission ceases, it'll keep scanning for the next frequency that it picks up that it's being used. Right, so very useful. Right, so in case of an emergency, you can actually scan the entire frequency range. You don't even need to know who's on that, frequency range. You'll just pick up random sort of calls. You'll pick up UHF radio, whatever you're scanning. Whatever frequency is that you're scanning as well. So scanning typically is listening only. You cannot transmit with these devices. It won't let you transmit. It's only a listening device. Think of it like a AM/FM radio in your car, but a much wider range. If you want to transmit, so two-way communication, the license-free options in Australia are the 27 megahertz, 40 channel, UHF CB, which is your 80 channels that you can buy from off the shelf. And then there's marine, which are dedicated just for vessels. And you cannot use the vessel radios on land. So with I won't go into marine radio, but I use marine radio extensively when we're on yachts. And there are marine rescue monitor channels, channel 16, which are distress channels, right? And you have to check in, check out when you're leaving the port and so on, right? So there's a lot of safety rules around that. And if you own a boat, you will know all about that. So we're not covering that. We're mostly focusing on off-grid land communication. So these are the citizen band unlicensed radios. Obviously, there's many other frequencies that are used by amateur radio enthusiasts, which we're not covering today. For those, you need a license, right? So for these two, the number one, number two frequencies that are listed there, you can just walk into any shop that sells radios and get your 80 channel UHF, which is the most popular one at the moment. Right, so this is your traditional, what they call analog communication, analog radios that have been around for quite a long time and are still in use today. So with UHF, on the left-hand side there, you can see the common channels and the usage. So channel 5 and 35 are used for emergency distress signals. Channel 11 is a calling channel. So that's where you meet up. If you want someone, if you're waiting for someone, you typically call them on channel 11, and then you pick another channel that you go to have your conversation. There's also a channel for caravans, camper vans, traveling, Pacific Highway, Bruce Highway, or just on most highways. There's a channel for that as well. There's road channels and four-wheel drive channels and so on. General use channels, and then there's also repeater channels. So with a repeater, these are dedicated radio repeaters. And on the right-hand side, I've just included a map in New South Wales of the repeaters that are being used there, and the input, transmit, and output receive frequencies there as well. So you can actually relay your messages through and extend the range through a repeater, right? So even though your little walkie-talkie might have 5 watt and very limited range, if you are within range of a repeater, you can transmit and repeat that signal much further. So obviously the other person would need to be on the other side of the repeater, right, for it to work properly. So repeaters, there's quite a few of those repeaters around, and on high mountains, typical elevation here in Port Macquarie, it's about 500 meters above sea level. Some are even more. So these are, again, please check to make sure that these are still available, and the prices might not be accurate, but just give you an idea of some of the more common handheld UHF radios from GME, from Uniden, Oricom. They're all limited to 5 watts, if you notice. And they're all been pre-programmed with 80 channels. So you just turn the dial and it'll go from channel 1, 2, 3, right through to 80. Right, and then back to 1 again. That's all you have. There is a scanning function on some of these, but it's only scanning to see who's talking on what of the 80 channels. It's not scanning a wider range where you can hear the SES, the fireys and so on. It's only scanning the 80 UHF channels if it's got a scanning function built into it. And you can see there in the table below, the frequency range. They're all the same frequency range. All 80 channels, right, fall within that frequency range. You can get quite a lot of accessories as well for those. You can get a handheld microphone, so you can have the radio on your belt, and you can use a microphone in your hand. You can have a voice-free microphone, like a headset, a Vox, which is voice-activated microphone. There's lots of chargers, and more importantly, with a lot of these radios, they've got very small antennas, so you can interchange and put a larger antenna on. You can connect it to an external antenna as well if you like. You can connect it to different power sources, but they are portable units. So these are your off-the-shelf radios that you can buy, in most places. Right, using channel 5 and channel 35. So there's a certain etiquette to using these channels. So channel 5 is typically you call for someone, you get a general contact, request for assistance, and then some of the enthusiasts that are on UHF, can call emergency on your behalf. In the old days, there used to be a dedicated, I think it was called Crest, they used to monitor the emergency channels because the 27 megahertz was used quite extensively back in the old day, and they used to actually monitor, respond, and then that was the emergency center, and then they would relay the message and then get emergency services out to you. These days, I think it's actually relayed by other enthusiasts and other people on there. So who monitors channel 535? We've got here general public, other UHF users, volunteering groups, amateur radio enthusiasts, some emergency services. I don't think they do it directly, but there are some. Transport and truckies and so on. So there's a bit of a procedure there of how to call for help. You need to, don't, over any radio, it's a public network, so you don't give out your personal details unless it's absolutely necessary in case of an emergency, right? But because remember that anyone can listen in on any of these channels. They are public channels. Right, so even though people can listen, you can use CTCS and DCS to filter out unwanted conversations. Right, so this is not encryption. Right, so a lot of people think that this gives you a private channel. It does not. Right? It's still a public channel, and others can actually still listen in. So it's just filtering out all the other unwanted radios that are talking at the same time. So if you've got two radios with the same matching analog or digital signal tone, then they will listen and you can talk to each other, but it will block out everyone else. Right, so it's just a very basic function to make sure that only you can hear the other party, but that doesn't mean that other party, that random people can't hear you if they tune in. Right, so what are some of the enthusiasts doing? And I'm not talking about ham radio in particular. Ham radio operators or amateur radio operators are licensed. They spend quite a lot of time, going through their certification and licensing, and they have amateur radio rigs worth thousands of dollars sometimes that are programmable, and they have large setups and so on. So that there are some amateur radio enthusiasts carry these, but there's a lot of people that have discovered that you can get cheap UHF, VHF radios, places like AliExpress, eBay, wherever else, from China direct. Now, these are quite interesting because they're not certified in Australia, but quite a lot of people are using them. They are programmable, meaning they don't just have 80 channels. Well, actually, when they come, they don't have anything in the memory banks. So some of these memory banks can be, one on the left-hand side is 1,000 channels. One on the right-hand side is 200 channels. So they're blank to start off with. You have to program your own channels in there. So if you wanted to have the 80 channel UHF that a standard UHF radio comes with off the shelf when you buy it from the shop, you have to program each one of those frequencies in. You can connect it to a computer and program using a program called Chirp. You can actually program those frequencies and then just push that program straight out to the radio, and then you can program all 1,000 memory banks if you like. You can program other frequencies. You can see up the top there, the frequency range for transmitting is 144. So the VHF range, which is where the marine radios are, and also the UHF. And it's much wider range. It's not 476 megahertz onwards. It actually goes much wider. So you have to be careful what you program into these radios, because if you don't program them correctly, you can get yourself into a bit of trouble as well. If you're transmitting on a channel that, or a frequency that hasn't been license that hasn't been dedicated for unlicensed use. But they are very versatile, right? And the function that I like on some of these radios is the fact that you can actually, there's a frequency range in the middle of the table there that you can listen on some frequencies as well, which is a wider range. You can't transmit on those, but you can listen to, say, airband, which is aeroplanes, right? Or helicopters and so on, emergency vehicles. So SES you might pick up the fire service and so on, right? So it's both a radio, a dual purpose, dual band radio for transmitting, but it's also listening to a much wider range. So if you wanted to pick up other services like a scanner would. The one on the right-hand side is becoming quite popular now because you can actually modify the firmware to do all sorts of cool things, like have a spectrum analyzer and receive sideband and so on. Right, so it's very flexible in what you can do with it. A large community of people that are using those. Great little devices. But again, they're programmable, so, you know, in the future, if things change, you could probably use them. You know, if you're licensed, you can use them, no problems. But if you're not licensed to, you know, to transmit outside of the 80-channel UHF, for instance, then you have to make sure that they are programmed correctly. Right, so a little bit more on that UVK5, a popular brand there. I won't go into it, but, you know, you can have that as a reference guide. Again, just check the specs because I just, you know, asked ChatGPT to summarize the specs for me. And with these ones, the photo that's used is actually the correct one, but in some of the other photos, I noticed they got butchered. So I'll point out where the photos don't match the product. Okay, so that's radio communication, UHF, VHF, and other radio frequencies, including scanning, so you can listening to emergency services and all sorts of transmissions. Right, so someone asked the question, well, I want to communicate off the grid, no infrastructure, securely, so that people do not listen to my transmission, which is pretty fair, right? Right, so LoRa, Internet of Things. A bit of an overview. So LoRa came about during the Internet of Things era, where there was a lot of focus on sensors using low-powered devices that were out in the field. Think of it as, for instance, here's one example. In agriculture, we have multiple sensors. You have smart irrigation, climate monitoring, water management, livestock monitoring, including GPS tracking of livestock, asset tracking, energy monitoring, and so on. So those devices, those sensors would then send information back through the gateway, through a network server to an application server where it would be displayed. So you could, for instance, see which sprinklers were on the farm. You could see how much water level there was, what the water level was in each tank, in each field, and so on. So the way they communicate is over a low-powered, long-range, low-power wide area network, right? Which is the 915 megahertz range in Australia and US. There's the frequency range on the right-hand side. So Europe uses a different frequency range. So you need to make sure when you are buying the equipment that you pick the right frequency range for your specific region. So this is how farmers use them. It's used in industrial factories, used in many, many fields. And there's thousands of sensors that you can use and different types of devices. So that's more communication where many sensors are sending information to a central point. And that could be localized within the farm only, or it could be, you know, a much wider area like, well, smart meters, gas meters, anything that needs to communicate data back, right, can use LoRa. I won't go into smart meters here, but if anyone's got any questions, we can take it offline. Right, so using an ESP32 microcontroller with a 915 megahertz radio, right, and you can buy this relatively cheap. You can see some examples there, like a Heltec, which is the one I'm using. You can actually then use these devices to for smarts, for Bluetooth connectivity, Wi-Fi connectivity, and then that controller will use the radio signal to transmit to another device, right, to a gateway or to another LoRa ESP32 device or to a sensor and so on. So enthusiasts have actually come up with two standards or two networks. So rather than communicating many sensors talking to a central point, there's two different ways to use these ESP32 chips to set up a mesh network, or two different types of mesh networks. On the left-hand side, the public mesh is called Meshtastic. So every node repeats the message. So these are like, think of it as little pages, and the devices are standalone, so you don't need a mobile phone, right? Some of them have keyboards with them as well, others don't. But if they don't have a keyboard, then you can use your mobile phone like a keyboard, communicate with the node, and that node then forms part of a mesh line of sight. Typically, these are tiny little things. I'll show you afterwards what they look like on camera. But you'll get a 1 kilometer range. Some of them you'll get 5 kilometers. Some people are getting 10 plus kilometers. There's repeaters as well that you can use and so on. So once you create a mesh network, and it's ad hoc, it'll create itself. You don't have to do anything. You just basically have your device. All you have to do is see another Meshtastic node, and you can then, if you have the same channel programmed, and these are private channels that are encrypted with AES 256 encryption, you can send private messages. So think of it as those old Motorola pages, but rather than the pages going to a central pager database and then being sent out, back to another pager, these are point-to-point, right? So it's actually a mesh network. When I say point-to-point, if you're sending a message from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, they'll relay through other people's Meshtastic nodes, right? But because if they don't have the right channel configured in there, they won't see the message. It's encrypted. On the right-hand side, there is a different way of setting them up, which is more structured. So Mesh Core, using the same devices, you just have different firmware that you program into them, that you flash them with. So with Mesh Core, it's more structured, and it's got a different range. You've got maximum hops of 64, so it can scale more. Right? The beauty of Meshtastic is you can use these devices ad hoc anywhere where there's no communication at all. So you could be in the middle of Australia, no 4G coverage, you don't have satellite connection, right? Because you don't have satellite equipment, let's say. You just have two of these devices and you can send messages. Messages only at this stage. Some you might be able to send some low data like photos as well, but there's no voice talking. So these are not walkie-talkies. These are more like messages. Right. So Meshtastic. So I did a demonstration in the last camp out with Meshtastic devices. So Meshtastic, you buy the hardware. You can get little kits where you get on the left-hand side top there, you'll get a Heltec V3 board. You'll get an antenna with it. You can get the battery as well, rechargeable battery, and even a case that you can put it all in, or you can print your own 3D print your own case. And then you've got a radio. You put the right firmware in there. You configure it from your phone, and then you can use it like a pager. Typically most people buy two so they can communicate, between two people. But you can communicate freely with other people that have these devices as well. So there is a Meshtastic app that works on the Android, iOS, Windows, and so on. You load that up, and you then are able to see a map where other devices are. If you have GPS in yours, I don't have GPS in mine, but you can actually have GPS in some of these devices, and you can block that or you can transmit that if you wish. You can send test packets, you can send messages, you can do a whole lot of things as well. So to flash a device, So let's say you get the board, you install the web flasher. So all it is, you go to a web page, you pick your device, it'll download the firmware. Once it'll erase it, put the right firmware on there, and then that's it. It takes about 2 minutes, and you've got a Meshtastic configured device, right? Flash device. If you want to use the same device for Mesh Core, you can just erase it and put the Mesh Core firmware in instead. There is a dual boot now where you can actually boot into one or the other at a time. You can't use both at the same time. So very flexible now. And Mesh Core, very similar, same hardware, and you can just give different firmware. And so it's just a different network layer protocol that it uses to communicate to create the mesh. Now, this slide got butchered by ChatGPT. I asked it to put the actual LilyGo as a brand of LoRa products that have keyboards. They look nothing like that. So if you go to the website, you type LilyGo in your search engine, you will see what they actually look like. So they look like Blackberries. They have a keyboard. A little bit different to the one on the left-hand side is very blocky. That's not the right photo there. But yeah, they look like a BlackBerry. And the one that the T-Pager, sorry, the T-Pager looks more like what's the ebook reader? Kindle. Looks almost like a Kindle, right? So these are dedicated LoRa devices that you can put Meshtastic or Mesh Core on, and you have a keyboard. You don't need to carry a phone, and you can send messages to anyone with the same group or public groups. There's also public groups, and you can just communicate. Line of sight, typically I've tested here, typically 1 to 2 kilometers for a very small device. But if you've got a different antenna on there, I've got a tiny little antenna, but if you've got a larger antenna, you can get decent range even from a portable device. Any questions before I move on? So there are maps you can find online, and you can actually see in your area. Mesh Core will probably be more structured, and there will be more nodes and repeaters and so on in your area, and you will see them communicating in real time. It just shows a little icon to say, hey, we're communicating. You won't see the messages, but at least you'll get an idea who's around you is using Mesh Core. Meshtastic has got some maps. They're not up to date, but Meshtastic is more ad hoc, right? So it's more for concerts, let's say. Let's say you go to a concert, there's no 4G coverage, and then the security guards want to communicate. They either use a UHF radio if they wish, but other people can hear them if they have a UHF radio, or they can communicate using Meshtastic nodes where they send messages back and forth, encrypted and secure, right? So it creates its own mesh network anywhere you are. Encryption. So there's a lot of misconception around encryption. So encryption with Meshtastic in particular, right? Have a look at the simple analogy down the bottom of the screen there. It's actually quite good. So what happens is, so the mesh node, think of it as you have a lock to your. Just zoom in. Can you see that better? Should have been zooming in on some of the things. Sorry. Right. So you lock your message in a safe. Then that safe gets put over the mesh network, goes through multiple nodes. Anyone can see that there's a safe being transported, but they can't see what's inside the safe. When it gets to the destination and the node that has got the right channel configured with the right keys, has the right key, can decrypt that message and read that message. So that's very, very simple analogy of how AES 256 or other forms of encryption work. And this is similar to any sort of encryption that is being used, what they call end-to-end encryption. Be careful with encryption that's being used by some proprietary companies where it encrypts the message, but then that information the data goes over to a cloud server and then comes back from the cloud server to the other node. And I'll show you some examples there. You need to be in control of your keys, right, in order to have ability to trust the network, right? So if you don't hold your keys, someone else does, then you might not have control over your encryption. Right. So that's using Meshtastic. Small devices. It's still evolving. So Meshtastic is still evolving, right? I'll show you some examples, but go to the LilyGo page, for instance, and you will see the products are maturing now. They've got keyboards. You can send stuff. You don't need to be connected to your mobile phone to use as a keyboard or to configure the devices. They are standalone devices, look like Blackberries, but they don't use the 4G, 5G, or any other infrastructure. It's standalone and it's secure. Right, so I've had a lot of people contact me on Telegram and asking about POCs. So PTT, or push-to-talk-over-cellular network. So if you have a look at the bottom here, we've got POC radio, right? Push-to-talk radio. It's got a 4G card in it, right? 4G IoT SIM, which is data only. And these could be global SIMs, so they work anywhere around the world, but they are still SIMs. They use data. Some of them don't have subscription, right? It's bundled into the purchase of the radio. When I say radio, it's a device. It's not actually a radio as in analog radio. It's just a device that is running software and then using software over 4G to communicate. Right, so it uses the 4G. So you need to be in a range of a 4G, 5G tower. Most of them are typically still using 4G. Right, so if you're not within range, you've got no service at all, just like your mobile phone, no different. Then that information goes through POClink, where you have groups and so on set up, secure groups, and then it sends that information to the members of that group. Right, so if you have a couple of radios, you put them into the same private group, and only those two radios can hear each other. If you've got more than two, then everyone will hear within that same group. They say that they use AES encryption. However, the encryption is not end-to-end. The encryption, it goes through the POClink cloud or the POClink servers. There are some radios, so they have 3 different versions, and there's many others. There's Echo radios and different Chinese equivalent radios. This is a US company, but this one's more at the forefront, but there are many others, more expensive ones that can do 4G. They can do 4G and Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi is useful if you're at home. You don't want to use the 4G and use up your 4G data. Use your Wi-Fi at home, or you can use Wi-Fi, Starlink Wi-Fi, right? You can use the Wi-Fi over Starlink if you're in the bush. Or on the right-hand side, the Ultra model, you can use analog. It's got analog radio, meaning it's got a UHF radio, but limited to only 16 channels, not 80 channels, and limited in power as well. Right? So some of these are quite pricey. They're very easy to use, but very limited as well. Okay, so you have to be within the 4G LTE range or have Wi-Fi. If you don't have that, they're pretty much useless. The analog radio is very limited because it only puts out 2 watts. Most radios put out 5 watts. So 2 watts will get you 500 meters, maybe a kilometer line of sight. Still useful, but don't expect it to perform like a proper UHF or VHF radio. Okay, so here's a comparison of POClink Ultra versus a standard 80-channel UHF CB radio. Right, so 16 channels only. From the manual, this is where the information I got. 16 channels. And then they didn't have the emergency channel, I don't think, one of them. No repeater capability. So only 16 analog channels, no repeater capability, no emergency channel access, I can't remember if it had channel 5 or not. It says he 128. I have to double check. But he didn't have 35, for instance, because that's using repeater. So you couldn't access emergency services. There's no scanning functions on there. It's very low powered. It's no replacement for a scanner or for a UHF radio. It's a very low powered sort of version of it. So yeah, can't use repeaters. Well, I've just said all that there. Right, so it's got 60% less power. But the 4G function is very clear. It's just think of it as using, I don't know, Telegram or any other sort of messenger where you can use voice to communicate or video to communicate, or even a Zoom meeting, right? Zoom meeting without the video, right? So very similar function. And you can have quite a few people within the group. Okay.
Can I just jump in there for a second?
Yeah.
So when we're talking off-grid and remote access and, you're going hiking, with the options that you've given, how is it going to work with charging? Are there battery operated? Is there options for solar charging? Like all the options you're given at the moment, right? What really is the best if power's out? Nowhere. And, batteries are low, you're out there for a week, blah, 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 blah. So what rechargeable options are there for the ones that you showed so far?
Okay, yeah, good question. So everything that I showed so far, if it's portable, it can be recharged portably as well, right? So most these days have USB-C interfaces. So, your portable power bank, right? From a small one that recharges your phone to large ones. You can power them, you can recharge them. There's solar options as well. So you can use a solar charger, or what some people are doing with Meshtastic, for instance. What they're doing is buying Aldi garden lights, which have a solar panel on top. They pull the guts out of it, and they put a Meshtastic ESP32 Heltec node inside it, so that then becomes a repeater, right? A solar powered repeater with endless power, right? So yeah, you
Oh, wow.
can power them from solar. Some of them actually have ability to swap out batteries. You can charge them from vehicles. You've got cigarette lighters, plugs, so you can charge them from a vehicle directly. You name it, you can charge them any way you like. So you can just have a backpack with this stuff in it. So when I go hiking, I'll show you at the end, or almost near the end of the presentation, some of the devices if you like, and charging options as well. But
Yeah,
yeah, you can
please.
power all of this, because if the power's out, if the grid is out, you want to make sure that you've got power for all these devices.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I also want to just read out what Cheryl has put in there. It's in relation to the LoRa. If LoRa is connected to the Internet of Things, then would it be trackable?
No, they're two standards. No, so they're two different standards. So the LoRa you see here, that was the first evolution, was basically so when I worked in an innovation lab in 2016, a lot of the startups wanted to use LoRa as a technology for low powered sensors out in the field that had battery life of 1 year plus. And then they would only send information when they needed to, and then they would go into a dormant state, right? So on a farm is a great example. You've got long distances, line of sight, maybe a few kilometers between, different sheds or facilities, and you want to send information, and you've got, different types of sensors when you're monitoring what the farm is doing, right? So that's LoRa. That's low powered radio device that's using 915 megahertz here in Australia to communicate small, telemetry information. What radio enthusiasts have done is taken that same chip, right, the smart microcontroller, ESP32 microcontroller, and they have configured it so that you can actually have a mesh network. Think of it as an internet. Internet is a mesh network, right? Well, it's more structured, but it's a network of many nodes, right? And the internet is. And Meshtastic and Meshcore are two different, ways of setting up a ad hoc network it doesn't use any other infrastructure, just radio signals using the LoRa radios.
So would you do a workshop how to turn the Aldi solar lights into a mesh network? I think half the room would show up.
Yeah, well, the solar light is more if you want solar powered. You don't need that I'll show you the devices. Actually, I could probably stop it here if you like. I've got a couple of other things that I got towards the end there. You can use Zello on your phone as a push to talk.
Yeah.
Push to talk is like a CB radio. So you can
I
use
just
it.
think it'd be a really good backup because, you just stick your solar lights in the garden and off you go with the mesh network. If we know how to do that, we can literally go all across and everyone can reach each other without worry. Just have them in the garden the whole time. I think that's perfect.
Well, that's right. Most people would have it sort of, on top of the house with a larger antenna so they can reach more. I can show you a mesh network. I'll just skip a lot of this stuff. These are other options. Selfie, if you're not familiar, by the way, is how to boost your 4G, 5G signal. Right? There are products out there where you can, if you're in a country area and you're not getting a good 4G coverage, you can boost your signal. So you can have that slide as a reference. I'll finish up. I only got a couple of things here. So these are some of the radios. Right. Okay, so some of these radios, this push-to-talk-over-cellular network, have got some crazy sort of, sales point here. Like, what does it say here? No contracts, no license. Yes, somewhat true. I've emailed the company in the US, and they wouldn't give me how much data you get with the SIM card, right? With the global SIM card, they wouldn't tell me. But some of them are limited. Like this one says unlimited range. Well, not really. It depends on where the cellular coverage is. So it won't work most of Australia outside of the popular areas. And analog 2 watts will only get you a kilometer at best, right? So they make all sorts of claims, but not true. But this one here, this is POClink. No license, no programming. Well, you have to program groups, but encrypted calls. I had somewhere here. I had another one. No, I think that's it. I had one basically, it said that you're limited to 800 megabytes per month, and that's about 80 hours or so per month. I'm going to see if I can pull up a web page and show you a couple of things if you like. How much time do I have?
Well, we've gone over, but don't worry about that. It's the most comprehensive communications Zoom I think most people could ever attend. There's a lot of information in there. We are so blessed to have you, Milan, to be able to have this information. I think probably the main thing is in your communities, if you identified what the needs are, because every community is going to be slightly different with the number of people and the proximity and what you want to get out of your off-grid communications, narrowing it down that way, and then being able to come back and review the presentation and the slides again to go, okay, well, what's going to be suitable for us in our group? And then for everyone to decide, go with that one thing so that you can all have that connection. Hit your emoji button, guys, if you've enjoyed this presentation tonight.
So it was a bit too much. I'm more ADHD, so a lot of those slides have got a lot of information. But at least you've got them as a reference if you want. And you got a bit of an overview of different types of technologies that you can use off the shelf, consumer goods. There are other commercial grade, and very expensive solutions from Motorola and so on, which are encrypted, like that the police use, for instance, and other businesses, corporations are using. So they're very expensive and they're dedicated and they've got certain, dedicated channels and so on. So those ones, cost quite a fair bit. Can you see my webpage?
Yes, we can see that and all the little blue dots.
Yeah, so this is Mesh Core, right? So if we have a look, say in Sydney, and this is all over the country. So you can see the heat map here. So that's communication that happened in the last 10 minutes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and you can see all the different, if you click on individual devices. I don't know. Yeah, so it'll tell you that one's a repeater. So you could see in Newtown, there's a repeater, tells you the location. And then, you might have a node. I think the purple node here. Companion, they call it. On Meshtastic, it's called a node. On MeshCore, it's called a companion. So that's a little device that you have in your pocket, and you can then communicate, right? So let me show you. I'll just get rid of that and go back to video.
Yeah, there's so much more choice than we thought that we had. There's just lots of options. So, yeah.
Okay, so let me just show you a couple of devices. Okay, so this is a Meshtastic device that I was talking about inside a printed 3D case with a tiny little antenna. So it'd probably be hard to see what's on there.
Yeah, we can see a little screen.
That's the right way. Sorry, that's the right way. I'll get rid of the cable. Right. So you can see, the device.
Yep.
So this will then connect to the Meshtastic app on your mobile phone, and you can then send messages through it. So that's acting like a radio modem, think of it. Doesn't use cellular, doesn't use internet, doesn't use anything else. So there's a couple here. There's a white one as well. All right, so we can communicate. So my wife can have one at home or in her pocket. She could be shopping, and it doesn't matter where I am, I can send her a message. All right? Within range, obviously. And these devices are probably the most basic and smallest antenna devices you can get. All right, here's a PLB, personal location beacon, quite an old one. Right, the new ones are even smaller, like those inReach ones. Ooh, where's the camera? There we go. Okay, so this one's from 2010 when I went around Australia, and it still works. There's a test button on it. It still works to this very day. Right, so I've never had an emergency where I had to pull the pin on it, but if I do, that's what I carry with me. All right, you can get UHF 40-channel, 80-channel radios. These are really small, off-the-shelf, cheap Uniden radios, very small range. Look at the antenna. So you probably get about, and these will probably be 1 watt or 2 watt, similar to the POC analog radio portion. So not very, they don't go very far. What else is here? Here's another EPIRB. This is an EPIRB, right? So this is one for a boat. Much bigger devices. Okay, you have that on a vessel. Scanner. Okay, so this is what a scanner looks like. This is an old one too. This is 1,000 channels, I think it is. Scanner. Full range from, I don't know, something like 25. Actually, it goes right down to 0, I think, and to 1,300 megahertz. So in the old days, you used to be able to listen to police and even mobile telephone calls, believe it or not. So these days, it's a little bit more limited to the emergency services and other aircraft and a few other things. What else is here? I've got a whole desk full of stuff here. Oh, okay, power. So if you don't have a power bank, power banks are quite useful. This one has got wireless charging and then USB ports on the side. The one I recommend, these are quite good because you can have that in the backpack, and I can charge all my devices from that. My phone, the Meshtastic nodes from it, even the CB radios. CB radio. Here we go. A whole case here of CB radio. So these are programmable radios. These are UHF, VHF. Right, so that's a radio that you can program, right? So there's different types, and with those you can have microphones. So you can have that, clipped on microphone, programming cable, so you can program it from a laptop, cigarette lighter plug, so you can charge it. On the other end is that goes on the back of the radio, makes like a battery sort of thing, so you can charge it. Sorry, you can run it directly with your cigarette lighter from the. What was the other question? If you don't have one of these, this is from King's 4x4 Superstore. right? So I forget how big this is. This is the biggest one that they have in a portable range. Okay, so you can actually connect solar power through a controller into one of the ports, and then all the other ports are used to power your fridge, power your television, whatever you like. So look out for the yeah, they're pretty useful as well. You can charge pretty much everything for like a week from that. This is what I was talking about. I don't know if you'll see this because it's massive.
It just keeps getting bigger.
That's a satellite. That's a Starlink satellite, generation 2. So it was one of the first ones. But it's a portable kit. It's a backpack. It's heavy as. Now they're about a quarter of the size, right? Including the batteries you need to be, you know, anywhere in Australia, you have a satellite communication, internet, everything. So yeah, I've got more devices here, but I'm not going to go through them all. You got an idea now.
Love all those products. Marie talking here. I just wanted to ask you, that King's 4x4 package that you showed,
Yep.
is that sort of what would replace a generator?
No, they're smaller units. They won't last as long. So you're thinking of the larger ones that have an inverter. So this is only 12 volts and USB output. The ones that you would want to replace a generator need to have an inverter in there with 240 volt output.
Right. So that little one is more for like a caravan, or is it? Or
It's more portable.
a fridge in a 4-wheel drive or something?
You can run a fridge from it, yes. You know, like those compressor fridges, you can run that from it. But typically, you know, you would want something like a Bluetti, you know, or a larger lithium ion or lithium lipo battery to power, you know, larger devices like your house or something like that. If you're off grid completely.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for a great presentation.
Great presentation. You have to know what you're doing with the ham radio. You have to be part of a club or be trained. You can't just buy it off the shelf and start using it.
Yeah, that's right. So you have to have a license. You have to pass certain, you know, certification as well.
So Meshtastic has sort of taken the place of what a ham radio might have been able to do in the past.
No, Meshtastic is more private messaging like the old Motorola pages were. But it's ad hoc. So whereas the Motorola pages and other brand pages used everything went back to a central server, and then got distributed to the other pages and so on. Or you could do a broadcast page. These ones are different because you can actually have them ad hoc. Like I said, you could have them in a concert, right? So the beauty is the way you can set them up is once you set them up, and it's very easy to set up. I can go into my phone Meshtastic app and I'll say I would like call it security, right? Call it I don't know, concert security, and all the security guards and all the staff that are looking after that concert. It'll generate a QR code on my phone. It doesn't use the internet at all, right? Doesn't use the 4G network at all. It's disconnected. Anyone that goes past my phone that I trust can scan that code, and it'll automatically put that channel, that private channel, into their Meshtastic app, and then configure the Meshtastic little node with that channel. And from that point on, those people that have got that channel can communicate securely.
I think that's a good question, Marie, because, you know, it's a new thing we're getting our head around. But I think what you're really asking is that as we were growing up, we only heard about if you wanted to be off-grid and communicating, you'd be on a ham radio. But now look at all the options that we have. So,
yeah, exactly. And I did put in the book that Meshtastic was although I didn't know a lot about it, I knew from the research I'd done that it was the latest and greatest system to use. So it's really good to have that explanation of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
actually, I love that it's so big already, but if communities like ours were to get onto it, we would just have that much more advantage.
Yeah.
We do need to wrap up though, Milan, just letting you know, we do need to wrap up.
Yep.
We have really enjoyed tonight, but anything last words that you want to share?
I guess you need to have a look at your own individual needs within your family first, how you communicate within your family when the grid goes down, how you listen to emergency services. There are many options available, and you can actually do that right now on your phone with certain apps, scanner apps, so that you know when there is an emergency, you're already prepared, right? Then think about how you're going to communicate as a community. Right? If it's within, say, one location, that's a lot easier to do. If you wanted to do it across, and at the moment using Zoom and using Telegram groups, so it's quite easy, right? But if there is a problem, and there is a statewide emergency or something, or the Telstra grid goes down, how will you communicate? You might just go, well, you know what, I'm not going to communicate. I'm going to just wait it out. It's fine to do as well, right? So yeah, just think about what your communication needs are, and there's many solutions out there that are available at the moment and that are very low and cost effective that you can implement quite easily.
Okay, Andrew, I can see your
Just
hand up.
one last quick question. Is there a limit to how many Meshtastics you can have in an area?
No, there isn't, but well, there is because of the hops, but yeah. So if you have too many, like if you're in a built-up area, you would probably use mesh core because it's more structured. If you're somewhere in a remote area and you want ad hoc communication, then Meshtastic's much easier to use and to set up for that sort of stuff, for smaller sort of groups. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful.
I noticed a lot of the amateur radio club have adopted mesh core, and they're using mesh core more because it's more structured. So there's a lot more repeaters and things like that for mesh core in this area, in the rural area. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to wrap up this portion of it. I'm just going to close the recording, but not close the room. So, Milan, thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing with us your knowledge. It's certainly very in-depth, and we really appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be many more opportunities we'll create for asking questions, and because we'll do another wave, like once communities start to decide, okay, how are we going to really want to communicate more, maybe we'll run more sessions and localized workshops. So yeah, thanks again, Milan. That was excellent. And we'll take those slides that you have shared and put them with the link with this recording and on our channels, and also in the next email. So I think that'll be really handy to have. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to close this recording. Milana, you're amazing.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.